Hello. Today General Hospital will reveal ever since the shattering revelation of Joe's true parentage, the young man had spiraled into a maelstrom of emotional chaos from which he saw no clear escape. The unveiling of his identity did not bring him closer to those bound to him by blood. Instead, it left him more isolated than ever, drowning in silence, suspicion, and the bitter sting of accusations hurled by the very people who once claimed to care for him. Among those who struggled the most with the revelation was Dante, who bore the heaviest burden of guilt. The moment Dante discovered that Gio was his son, the child he had unknowingly fathered with Brooke Lynn, his world fractured. The revelation struck not as a gift but a reckoning. What should have been a reunion marked by relief and love became instead a reminder of the many wrongs he had inflicted upon the boy. Chief among them was the harsh, unrelenting blame Dante had directed at Gio for Rocco's alcohol poisoning, words he now regretted with every breath, especially knowing they had been aimed at his own flesh and blood. But the chasm between them was not carved by ignorance alone, it was deepened by years of abandonment, by mistrust, and by the crushing weight of expectations neither of them could meet. Gio, long haunted by a profound loneliness and a sense of never truly belonging, built up emotional fortresses around himself. He saw the truth of his parentage not as a bridge to reconciliation, but as an inconvenient coincidence, a piece of biological trivia that held no bearing on the emotional injuries he had endured. To him, forgiveness could not be earned simply by the revelation of blood ties. It needed action. Proof. A reason to believe that love could exist beyond betrayal. Then, everything changed. As the storm between Sonny and Sidwell reached a terrifying crescendo, Gio found himself thrust unwillingly into the center of a deadly power struggle. Sidwell, no longer content with legal threats or whispered manipulation, decided to go after Sonny where it would hurt the most, his family. He orchestrated an escalating campaign of psychological warfare, leaked surveillance photos, doctored audio tapes, media slander, legal interference. Each one designed to dismantle the protective walls around Sonny's loved ones. But Sidwell knew that the strongest empires are not toppled from the outside, they collapse from within. And Gio, the estranged, mistrustful, and seemingly vulnerable outsider, seemed to be the perfect weak link. So, the trap was laid. Gio received a mysterious message luring him to a derelict dockyard on the river's edge, promising him answers, closure, and perhaps, a new truth. But what awaited him was not clarity, but an ambush. Sidwell had meticulously crafted the illusion of discovery, hoping Joe's longing for identity would blind him to the danger. What he hadn't anticipated was that Gio had changed. In the days leading up to the confrontation, Gio had begun noticing patterns, people tailing him, unmarked cars circling his neighborhood, questions being asked in hushed tones at the boxing gym. Instinct and trauma had trained him to recognize danger, and this time, he acted with deliberate calculation. Rather than walk blindly into the trap, Gio armed himself with resolve and technology. Hidden in the lining of his jacket was a miniature recording device equipped with a real-time feed. As Sidwell monologued, taunting him with details about Sonny's supposed crimes, his betrayals, and his impending downfall, Gio captured every word. He recorded Sidwell's drunken admission that he had ordered a failed assassination attempt on Sonny months ago, cloaked as a warehouse explosion. But even as Gio gathered evidence, the moment he had feared finally arrived. Sidwell's men emerged from the shadows, guns drawn, faces obscured by black masks. The objective was clear, Gio would not leave that dock alive. With seconds to spare, Gio activated a silent SOS embedded in the emergency beacon that Sonny had given him in a rare moment of vulnerability months prior, a device Gio had pretended to throw away, but had secretly kept. That beacon's signal triggered a chain of rapid events. At the Corinthos compound, alarms blared. Jason and Dante, both monitoring any signs of threats to Sonny's family, mobilized instantly. Within minutes, a black SUV sped toward the river. What happened next was the kind of scene typically reserved for the most harrowing war films. As Sidwell's men advanced on Gio, weapons cocked, Jason launched the first counterstrike, drawing fire. Dante leapt from behind a shipping container, gun blazing, shouting tactical commands as chaos erupted. Explosions of light and sound tore through the night. Amid the hail of bullets, Dante saw Gio drop to one knee, covering his head, and without hesitation, he ran forward, body first, arms wide, taking a shot to the shoulder to shield his son. Time slowed. Gio looked up just in time to see Dante crumple, but not fall. His father remained standing, bleeding but alive. In that moment, something primal surged in Gio. He rose with a force born not of vengeance, but of purpose. He turned and, with precise force, disarmed the closest attacker, slamming him against the metal siding of the dock warehouse. In one fluid movement, he swung around and tackled Sidwell himself, knocking him to the ground. The confrontation ended not with gunfire, but with Sidwell's arrogant face pressed against cold concrete, held in place by the very boy he had underestimated. Sirens wailed in the distance as police cars approached. But for Dante and Gio, the most deafening sound was silence. The kind of silence that follows clarity, that moment when the veil of misunderstanding is finally lifted. As paramedics worked on Dante's wound and officers dragged the handcuffed Sidwell away, Gio sat beside his father, hands shaking, blood on his knuckles. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Dante reached for his son's hand and squeezed, silently acknowledging everything that had been broken, and everything that had just been mended. From that night on, the trajectory of Joe's life changed. He didn't return to his old apartment. He didn't disappear into the shadows of Port Charles. Instead, he walked through the front doors of Sonny's home and didn't leave. The man he had once kept at a distance now welcomed him with arms wide open, and for the first time, Gio let himself be held. It wasn't long before Sonny, overwhelmed with gratitude and recognizing the courage Gio had displayed, did something no one expected. He handed the reins of his empire to his grandson. It was a symbolic gesture, yes, but also a practical one. Sonny knew that the world was changing, and the future demanded a new kind of leader, one forged in adversity, sharpened by betrayal, but still capable of love. Under Joe's guidance, the Corinthos legacy began its transformation. No longer ruled by fear and retaliation, it evolved into something smarter, more discreet, more modern. And while the shadows of the past lingered, as they always would, Gio moved forward with a sense of clarity and belonging he had never known. He was no longer the boy left behind. He was the man who saved his family. The man who turned a father's mistake into a second chance. The man who proved that blood alone doesn't make someone family, but choice, sacrifice, and forgiveness do. The aftermath of the dockyard ambush sent shockwaves throughout Port Charles, reverberating far beyond the criminal underworld and into every quiet corner of the town. It was not just another violent confrontation in Sonny's war against his enemies, it was a turning point, a seismic shift that unraveled secrets long buried and redrew the emotional architecture of an entire family. The public never saw the carnage, never heard the screams or felt the heat of gunfire, because before any news outlet could get wind of the incident, the narrative was already being rewritten by something far more powerful than gossip, truth. The truth came in the form of a video. Grainy, unfiltered, but damning in every sense of the word. It was recorded by Gio in the final moments before chaos exploded around him, capturing Sidwell's voice as he bragged about orchestrating a murder plot against Sonny and manipulating law enforcement to tear the Corinthos family apart from the inside. With calculated urgency, the footage was uploaded and delivered directly to a federal attorney who had long been skeptical of the distorted versions of justice in Port Charles. That video became the one thing Sidwell could not buy his way out of, could not deny or spin. It was indisputable, unvarnished, and lethal to his reputation, credibility, and freedom. Within hours of receiving the footage, the Department of Justice launched an immediate investigation into Sidwell's activities, issuing warrants and freezing his assets. His empire, once built on fear and influence, began to crumble beneath the weight of his own arrogance, undone by the very boy he tried to eliminate. Yet even as the legal system moved swiftly to devour one of its most dangerous predators, the true heart of the story unfolded quietly in a hospital room at General Hospital. Dante, still pale from blood loss and groggy from painkillers, lay in bed with a thick bandage strapped across his shoulder. The sterile white walls, the faint beeping of machines, the scent of antiseptic, none of it registered. His mind was elsewhere, lost in the haze of what had just happened. He had taken a bullet for a boy who had once refused to even look him in the eye. He had thrown his body into the line of fire not because of duty or guilt, but because something had shifted deep inside him the moment he saw Gio in danger. It was instinct. It was love. And then, without announcement or hesitation, Gio appeared in the doorway. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence was enough, a quiet declaration of something unspoken, something more powerful than words. In his hands, he held a piece of paper, aged and creased from years of folding and unfolding, edges worn from being touched too many times in the darkness of a lonely childhood. Without making a sound, he crossed the room and laid the paper on the table beside Dante's bed. Then he stepped back, folded his arms across his chest, and stood in silence. Dante turned his head slowly, blinking against the drowsiness as his eyes focused on the image before him. It was a drawing, childlike but evocative. Colored pencil on lined notebook paper. A man stood tall in the center, holding the hand of a smaller boy on his right and shielding a slightly older boy with his left arm stretched out protectively. The figures were rough, almost abstract, but the intention was clear. It was a wish. A dream. A memory that never happened. Gio, as a child, had drawn his fantasy of family, not wealth or fame, not safety behind gates or cameras, but something simple and profound. A man who stood between danger and his sons. A man who chose to stay. A man who protected. For years, Gio believed that person didn't exist. That he never would. And yet, in the most harrowing moment of his life, Dante had become exactly that man. Not out of obligation, but from a place of fierce, undeniable love. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The hospital hummed around them. Voices echoed faintly from the hallway, but in that room, time stood still. When Dante finally looked up at his son, his eyes brimmed with something raw, something Gio had never seen from him before, not regret, not confusion, not guilt, but pride. Pure, overwhelming, trembling pride. His hand reached out, fingers shaking, and Gio took it without hesitation. It was a gesture that didn't erase the years they had lost, the words they had said, or the wounds they had left on each other's souls. But it was a beginning. The drawing remained on the table, illuminated by the weak afternoon sunlight streaming through the blinds. It would be framed one day, Dante knew. Not as art, but as testimony. Testimony to the fact that sometimes dreams drawn by children in secret notebooks can become real, not because the world suddenly becomes fair, but because people choose to show up when it matters most. Because a father, even one who arrives late, can still be a hero. And because a son, even one long abandoned, can still find it in himself to believe again. In the days following the harrowing confrontation with Sidwell, Gio did not return to Bensonhurst. He didn't retreat into the shadows or disappear into the familiar corners of his past. Instead, he made a choice that stunned the entire community of Port Charles, a choice not rooted in fear or guilt, but in resolve. He moved in with Sonny. The announcement wasn't made with fanfare or press conferences, and yet its impact rippled through every circle of power, every whispering corridor of the criminal underworld, and every close-knit neighborhood cafe where people speculated about the next generation of the Corinthos legacy. To many, it seemed unthinkable. The once distant boy, often seen as nothing more than a byproduct of chaos and secrecy, had now stepped fully into the heart of one of the most formidable families in Port Charles. But Gio wasn't running from the past. He wasn't seeking shelter from the aftermath of trauma. He was walking straight into the future, not just to rewrite his own story, but to rewrite the legacy of the family he had once thought he could never belong to. For so long, he had lived on the outskirts of identity, constantly doubting whether he was ever truly wanted, whether he could ever earn a seat at the table without strings or expectations. That doubt had driven his defiance, his rage, his calculated detachment. But now, everything had shifted. The moment Dante had taken a bullet for him, the moment Sonny had embraced him without hesitation, something inside Gio had cracked open. For the first time, he saw himself not as someone on the outside looking in, but as someone with the power to protect from within. Sonny had spent a lifetime preparing for loss. He had buried loved ones, watched friends turn into enemies, and built a fortress of steel around his emotions just to survive. But when Gio, unprompted, called him family, not as an obligation or a manipulation, but from a place of hard-earned trust, Sonny cried. The tears were not of sadness or grief. They were of release. They were the tears of a man who had spent decades believing he had lost too much to ever feel whole again. In Gio, Sonny didn't just see a grandson or an heir, he saw a second chance at legacy, not the violent kind built through muscle and fear, but the enduring kind built through resilience and redemption. It wasn't long before Sonny made a decision that no one, perhaps not even he himself, had fully anticipated. In a closed-door meeting with his most trusted associates, he announced that he was stepping back. Not retiring. Not vanishing. But passing the torch. Officially and unequivocally, Sonny transferred the stewardship of his empire, both the legitimate business holdings and the deeply entrenched strategic networks, to Gio. There were murmurs, objections, disbelief. Gio was young, untested in leadership, and had only recently entered the fold. But Sonny silenced every doubt with one unshakable truth. Leadership is not inherited through blood or built on age. It is proven through choices. And Gio, in the darkest moment of his life, had chosen to protect, to sacrifice, and to rise. The transition was not ceremonial. There were no grand gestures or gaudy displays. It began with quiet visits to the warehouses, detailed briefings about supply chains, coded conversations with attorneys and union heads, and the delicate unraveling of partnerships forged in both trust and intimidation. Gio took it all in, not with arrogance, but with the solemn understanding that he was carrying something larger than himself. He wasn't there to replicate Sonny's rule. He was there to evolve it. Where Sonny had relied on loyalty forged in blood and fear, Gio cultivated alliances through transparency and modern strategy. He began dismantling the more volatile elements of the organization, slowly, carefully, methodically. Replacing brute force with discretion, and instilling in his network a sense of purpose that extended beyond survival. He strengthened the Corinthos philanthropic arm, expanded community outreach programs in underprivileged areas of Port Charles, and made it clear that the Corinthos name would no longer be synonymous with unchecked power, but with quiet, unbreakable stewardship. People talked, of course. They always did. Some said Gio was too green, too emotional, too soft for the mantle he had taken on. But then they remembered the video, the recording that dismantled Sidwell's empire. They remembered the blood on his hands, not as a sign of violence, but of courage. They remembered the way he stood beside Sonny and Dante at the courthouse steps, not flanked by bodyguards, but with his head held high. And slowly, they began to believe. Not because Gio demanded it, but because he embodied it. Dante, still healing in more ways than one, often found himself watching Gio from afar. Sometimes from his office window. Sometimes from a rooftop. And on one particularly quiet afternoon, as he stood on the hospital roof watching the city pulse with life below, he understood something he hadn't been able to articulate before. There are moments in life that are irrevocable, decisions that cannot be undone, time that cannot be retrieved, damage that cannot be fully mended. But there are also moments that shine with redemptive clarity. Moments where, through unimaginable loss, something sacred is born. Gio had become more than just a son, more than just a successor. He had become a symbol, of transformation, of hope, of what it means to choose family not out of duty, but out of love. He had taken his own pain, his own fractured past, and shaped it into something that could heal others. Port Charles would never be the same because of it. Not because of the power he inherited, but because of the example he set. And so, through every boardroom meeting, every backroom negotiation, every late-night walk through the streets of Port Charles where Gio now walked with presence instead of burden, the town slowly came to accept a new truth. Redemption was not a gift reserved for saints. It was a path carved by the brave. And Gio, with the scars of a boy and the soul of a man, had chosen to walk it. Not away from who he had been, but toward everything he could still become.